All right, ladies and gentlemen, after long ado and after 3 episodes continuously being in my storage right now for other bands, that being Belvy Booth, Dead Awake, and Miss Mata until further notice. Welcome back to the Anatomy Podcast. This is going to be the first episode that we have done since we returned to Arizona from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. I already missed the green trees. I already miss it being gloomy almost every other day. And if not, tornado warnings or something like that this time of year. It's been nuts, but it is indeed welcoming and warming to return to the valley and be around those that, around more people that I'm familiar with, because I didn't really get to know anybody out there. But today's episode is concerning a band who has just started their discography with their new self-titled EP. This band is Bestial, and they have a YouTube channel. Like I said, they have a self-titled EP out now, and I'm sure they're already on the grind to make some more tunes. But today, the episode is concerning their spotlight, their introduction, as far as I'm concerned, in depth to the scene. We get to introduce you to their personalities for the first time. These guys haven't really done any other interviews as far as I'm aware. So that has a nice sense of exclusivity to the Anatomy Podcast. And we were meaning to do this episode all the way back when the EP first dropped, but stuff happened. Complications happened. Rescheduling happened. Everything happened. You know what I mean? It's insane, but it's awesome to finally be here and to be talking with the boys. And as you guys know, with the Anatomy Podcast, we have the first half, which is going to be for the people. This is going to be the docu-cast part of the podcast session. And then as we descend into the second half of the podcast, we will be dissecting their self-titled EP and talking everything about the future that they are able to disclose. So, for starters, gentlemen, how are you doing today?
Pretty good.
Doing pretty good.
Awesome. And as long as both parties are in good health, mentally and physically, I think that's a pretty good fucking start to the podcast. So, as we jump right into the first half, basically, both of you, gentlemen, let me know your names, let the audience know your names, your role in the band, and then we will proceed from that point.
I'm Shad. I do guitar, bass, pretty much all the instrumental stuff.
My name is Tyler, and I do all the screams, all the lyric writing, basically all the vocal stuff.
Fantastic. And I mean, after all, this is a 2-man project. It is a really solid project, and we're seeing more of that in the scene. Bands like Demon Defiled have been on the podcast not too long ago now, and that's a 2-man project. They seem to do pretty solid. They have a new album out. I think it's Death Autonomous, and that was some pretty solid shit. And then we have other bands in the scene like Disembodied Tyrant, who is technically a 1-piece project with, no, that's right, it's 2-piece, but the other person is actually just the drummer, and the primary person is the vocalist, the guitarist, the bassist, and the orchestral music producer. He's assisted with Immortal Disfigurement recently, and he's been just freaking knee deep in the scene. Shout out to Blake Mullins. So it's honestly so impressive to see so many bands now emerging in the scene who do 2 or 3-person projects, and you have a single musician shouldering so much creatively. It's impressive. It really is. So this is another one of those episodes, to say the least. Whoever wants to start first, we are looking to dive as early and deep as possible. Tell your story. Give you some time to tell us everything you think is relevant to your legacy, your history as a musician and getting into this band. Whoever wants to begin may begin.
Me and Tyler actually used to be in like a band, The Void Within. They're still active. I'm just no longer in it. But I really have been a fan of like early deathcore, the early 2010s deathcore. And in general, I really like that style, but I wanted to modernize it and use a lot of like the lower, baritone tunings, basically mesh the newer styles with the older styles. And we're from a very small rural community in the middle of nowhere, Missouri. And Tyler is one of the few dudes I know who can do those really aggressive style screams, and we'd already been in a band together. So I reached out to him while we were still doing the Void within, and basically asked him if he wanted to be, doing the side project with me. And he did. So from there on, we kind of just, cranked out our EP, and yeah.
Sweet. So if anything, Shad, what I definitely want to dive into is, being that you're taking the lead and you're taking the first section of that people part of the podcast, the documentary podcast session. What I want to do is go as early as you feel would be relevant to you getting into being a multi-instrumentalist, and basically the second half, the blood, right? Or even the bones, like whatever analogy you wish to use. I would definitely argue it's the bones, because the instrumentals, like, that's the backbone, that's the spine, the drums are the heartbeat, you know what I mean? So if anything, I would love to give you some time, give you an opportunity to just really go back as far as possible and talk about how you first got into being an instrumentalist, first got into being a musician, the bands you were into at the time, literally everything you feel that could be relevant to that part of your story. Take it away, sir.
All right. Well, I started off on bass guitar when I was like 15, and I'm 30 now. So I was like, 15 years ago.
Damn.
And I, was playing in like high school bands. I'm very good. And I'd always just been a band musician, dude. And somewhere along the way, I acquired some like recording gear, really just crappy 2-channel interface, free software, gotta start somewhere.
Gotta start somewhere. Exactly.
Yeah. I started recording my own demos and stuff, and started recording my bands on demos before we went to like big studios. And somewhere along the way, picked up guitar, wanted to learn to write my own songs. And that all kind of snowballed. I kept doing like little studio projects, side projects, stuff like that. Eventually, I opened up my own recording studio and started recording like local bands, tri-state area, and that stuff like that. And I guess I just kept working at engineering and also, instrumentality, writing, stuff like that. I eventually got a job for music libraries, writing like shitty little jingles for commercials and stuff like that.
Hey, you got exactly, dude. That's the homework, bro. That's the portfolio right there.
Yep. And so that went on for about 5 or 6 years. I joined a bunch of like actual bands. We performed, we toured and all that. And I took a break from music for a while just because it's hard being in a band when you have like 5 or 6 people, trying to get people to agree on stuff, trying to get scheduling, all that. And I found I like the studio environment a lot more, especially if it's just one other person. It's a lot easier to get decisions made. It's a lot easier to just, make executive decisions, stuff like that. And I just think that's where my element is in the studio. And basically, Bestial is like those many years of formation from that. I've done a lot of side projects before, but none of them really panned out. They were just me screwing around, trying to learn how to write songs. I think this was my first serious project where I had songs I was proud of, and I could find a vocalist who fit that style perfectly.
Yeah.
And I've always liked the extreme stuff. Like I said, I didn't start out the extreme way. This is going to sound really embarrassing, but my first ever like heavy band was like Kid Rock or something, and then it spiraled. I got into like Killswitch Engage. I had like the, Metallica, Slayer, like the typical Hot Topic metal stuff for a while. And slowly I started getting into the more extreme stuff. And like one of my favorite bands, probably Meshuggah, that took a while for me to get into that side of things. And it just kind of spiraled. And now I'm just trying to write the heaviest shit possible.
Yeah, dude. And honestly, like, heart on my sleeve, right? Like, being absolutely transparent, because that's what the Anatomy podcast is. It's an opportunity for other musicians to tell their story, and then for me to compare, because everybody starts somewhere. Bro, dude, the heaviest band ever that I started with was Black Veil Brides, bro. And I remember, bro, when I first listened to them because of their song In the End, I was like, yeah, this is heroic. This is badass. And because of their paint, like their face paint, right? Their war paint, I was absolutely convinced when I first got into them that they were an occultic Satanist band, like, and just on the same level as like Cradle of Filth or even you know, I didn't know them at the time, but like Burzum or Mayhem, I remember listening to them and I'm like, dude, this is so fucking heavy. And their main logo is a pentagram made of their like emblem and shit. This is raw. This is edgy. And then Faithless came out, right? That was back in 2015. Literally has a giant demon dude on the album cover, just holding a giant cross as a staff, just stabbed and crushed into the earth, right? You listen to the album though, and you're like, oh, so it's just like Metallica, but a little bit more modernized, a little bit more heavier. And I guess if nothing else, no shame, no shade on Metallica, because I mean they're iconic for metal. But like at the very least, Black Veil Brides went from that very emo, very edgy, like razor blade necklace edgy, to kind of just like a like a kind of Kiss thing, right? And I remember, dude, I remember back in the day just listening to them and I'm like, I really hope these guys get heavier. That would be so sick. And they never did. And that's why I just kind of hopped off the train. But we all start somewhere. And if not Black Veil Brides, I started with Korn. But then alongside that, in my parents' iTunes catalog, there was also Tayo Cruz. There was also Katy Perry. There was Toby Mac, bro, one of the biggest Christian rock artists in the world, still to this day, because that scene is so suffocated and small. Because not a lot of people are about just like hallelujah and, you know, God's reign, bow down to him, and, you know, like all this other shit. There is an ultimate level of cringe to that, and especially for people like us. But ultimately, you know, I digress. We all start somewhere. We all start with a band that's relatively heavy, and we think it's the heaviest shit ever. We're like, oh, this is nice and muddy. And then you get freaking sobered when one of your homies shows you Slipknot's The Devil and I, when literally freaking Sid is chewing off his fingers. And for someone like me at the time, when I first saw that, I'm like, is he actually chewing off his fingers? What the fuck is wrong with these people? And then it just kind of snowballed into Marilyn Manson and Korn and Slipknot, Rob Zombie, bro. All these, like Cradle of Filth, obviously, Rammstein. It all snowballed, and it all snowballs musically. If you throw a kid right off the bat into Infant Annihilator, they're probably going to have a fucking seizure. So you got to start them off slow. You got to be like, yeah, Breaking Benjamin, bro, or Black Veil Brides, bro. So absolutely, without a doubt, you know, we all start somewhere, and that's completely okay. Anybody who's right now getting into rock or metal, just keep in mind that it all starts somewhere. We don't expect you to be into Burzum, Mayhem, Slipknot, Marilyn Manson, Infant Annihilator, fucking Lorna Shore right off the bat. But what's really cool these days is that we have this massive algorithm that caters towards that type of thing. And it's like, you know what? Here's something that's kind of nice, but still really fucking heavy. It's balanced, right? And it's more marketable. It's on a bigger label. So it's definitely more accessible these days. And a lot of kids are just so fed up and overwhelmed and annoyed with the world around them that they're ready for fucking Kublai Khan right off the bat or something like that. Who knows? So as you're getting into music and stuff, you did the homework. You went on tour. You were on the road. Like not many people, including myself, can say that just yet. And I mean, I can only imagine that you have some stories from on the road without disclosing any names that just really, you know, made you more comfortable with the studio environment. I completely understand that. But do you have any stories you wanted to tell concerning that time on the road that you put in that you're like, nah, I just want to stick to being a studio musician?
Well, you know, when I say tour, it wasn't like months on the road. We went on like, you know, 3-week long stints, you know, baby tours, but they were still, you know, weeks on the road without coming home. So I consider that tour.
Exactly.
So I didn't want people to think I was like playing with national headliners or anything. But,
Right.
you know, for one thing, you cram 5 dudes into a, you know, a Econoline 250 van in the middle of summer. You really learn what ball sweat smells like. And it's hard, you know, it's really anxiety driven, you know, when you're going out to these places you've never been before. You have no idea if you're going to make any money that night. There's a lot of times, you know, we played basically for the other bands that were there and like the bartender. And whenever we did these tours, they weren't with like any national booking agency. It was all DIY. So there was a lot of times we left empty handed. We had to like dip into our savings just to get gas to go to the next gig.
Right.
And I do remember one really, I guess, positive story was playing in Oklahoma. We played, this is one of my older, not very good bands, but, we were kids, we were having fun. We played somewhere in Oklahoma, it was somewhere in Tulsa. And it was one of those situations where we were basically playing for like the 5 other bands that were also touring on the bill. And some old sound guy, you could tell this was not his music at all. This was like metalcore we were playing, just, very early 2000s style stuff, nothing groundbreaking. And he had said, I don't understand this music, but I know you guys are good at it. That was like the most humbling comment ever that this dude could tell. But anyway, the whole being stuck with dudes, your bandmates, you either love them or hate them, and you really you figure that out on the road because you're stuck with them 24 hours a day. And I don't know, there was just a lot of chaos to touring. There's a lot of unknowns and a lot of just a lot of stress that is involved trying to coordinate it, trying to get sell merch. Then of course you got van breaking down, trouble on the road, which just every band is plagued with, car troubles. But somewhere along the way, I started getting more professional gigs in the studio, and I like the controlled environment of it. Thing is at your fingertips. If you don't like a guitar part, take it out, redo it. If you don't like this part, make it better. And I really liked that, being able to be in control. Whereas live, which I love playing live, don't get me wrong, it's, being on stage and seeing people throw down your music is like one of the best highs ever. But, it's all up to you and your band members if it's practiced or not, or, are your backing tracks going to shit out? Is the click track going to shit out? There's a lot that can go wrong. And as me being like an anxiously prone person, it was very nerve-wracking. And as I got older, I got like chronic health problems I won't get into, but like it just became harder for me to do it live. The grind of getting home at 2 a.m. every morning, you got to unload your shit. You're sore from windmilling and headbanging on stage, probably over from drinking, cheap beer from the drink tabs you get from the bar and stuff like that. I used to live for that. And now as I've gotten older, I don't know. I want to be comfy while I write my music, and I want to be able to take the time I want to make it the best possible product possible.
Absolutely. And like, speaking for someone who has not even spent a day on the road yet, but who has known so many musicians who have done at least national tours now, which is really interesting. And like, it really helps you get familiar with that mindset and familiar with what goes on. Like, there are so many what ifs, and especially if you're prone to anxiety, which I am too. I have like basically perpetual, but I just kind of became numb to it over time, and just like, no, dude, you can't base the future off of what ifs, right? But the thing is, with touring, absolutely, dude, it's like you really get to know the people that you're working with music on day in and day out. This is you being obligated, confined to a physical space with these individuals. And yeah, you see their true colors, I'm sure. You see how they act when it's not time to just play music or crank music. And you really just understand who these people are. And sometimes it's great. Sometimes you all are goofballs or whatever, and you're able to just have fun and do stupid shit on the road within legal parameters, of course. And it just adds to the experience, right? But sometimes things get cold. You want to be like physically distant from these other individuals, for example, I guess, not to name anybody specifically, but you want to like have physical space from these individuals, and you can't. You're like literally forced into a confined space, and you're like, dude, I want to beat this guy up so bad right now. Why are you storing all night, bro? I've been driving all night, just or whatever. Like, shit happens. But it really, when it comes to being on the road, whether for 3 weeks or multiple months, I can only imagine it really helped you understand what it's like to tour. And that's kind of like a sample. That 3-week leg was more or less a sample. So, I mean, at least you did the homework, you tried it out, and now you know ahead of time, it's not really for you. And I mean, fuck, dude, Infinite Annihilator, bro, bringing that band up again. I don't think they're ever planning to tour, but mainly because of geographical location and the space between all the members. Despite how much money they would make, despite the tours that they would get set up with all these big name bands, Like sometimes people are just more comfortable with studio work, and that's completely fine. That just means that you make an even more like unreal product, right? You make something that is like, are they ever going to play this live? And like maybe one day, right, with Infinite Annihilator, they'll finally tour and they'll be like, we understand. We understand the hype, we understand the demand. So now we'll provide after what, like 3 or 4 albums just in studio and maybe doing a couple vocal diaries with Dickie Allen. Everybody wants it so bad, but a part of me is thinking that the demand, as high as it is just not there yet. So hopefully that'll be the same thing with you guys. I mean, shit, bro. I was on the phone with James from Shrine and other projects yesterday, and his new project Possession with Intent. Shout out to them because they are releasing a song today. They're kind of going through that same process. It's like they want to release music, they want to get content out, and if the demand skyrockets and really builds up to something that can be sustainable, that's when they will go into physical tour. That's when they will start playing shows live. And I think that's a really good formula for bands to have, because if you're just throwing your soul on stage, if you're throwing your time, your effort, your physical patience, bro, at these venues, and half the time they're just being petty about it, they're like, meh, like whatever it could be. It's a whole process. It's a whole process. So build enough demand online to build enough demand for your content, for your music, and then worry about playing live shows. You know what I mean? I think that's a really, really good formula that all bands should be doing if they're starting online. If they're starting physically in a room and they're practicing and they're cranking the music during a practice session, so be it. But sometimes, man, especially in today's world, you gotta like have that distance, right? And you gotta like see what you can do on your own, see how it meshes with other people. And if it works, it's kind of like a blind date, right? You go there, you provide them the content, you provide them the first impression. And if they really like it, that's even better, bro. But I digress, digging into a whole bunch of stuff. And it's mostly been me talking this session. So let's give some time back to the boys. So obviously we're learning about you, Shadrick. We're learning about your involvement in production, in the instrumentation of Bestial. So if anything, what are some individuals that have kind of inspired you to really plug into any of your creative avenues recently? And if you want, we'll break it down to 5 different people, musicians, even like philosophers or whatever, or
Right.
major people in history. Go ahead and provide us 5, or even maybe 5 albums, EPs, songs of all time, you know, that type of thing. Go ahead and tell the people what you're into and what's gotten you into doing Bestial, because I know you mentioned Meshuggah and other bands before, but let's see how far we can isolate it down and provide that pressure.
Well, I'd say first off, and most recently, probably Buster Odaholm of Humanity's Last Breath. He's been a really huge inspiration and I guess musical influence recently, because he does a lot. You know, he was in Viltharta. He was the guitarist for Viltharta, and then he started Humanity's Last Breath initially the same way, you know, just a studio project. And he did all the production, which I think his production standards are just bar none. They're just some of the heaviest shit I've ever heard. And he was one of the first to show me, you know, I'd always been an 8-string guy. I've always liked low tunings, all the way to the 8 and 7-string. He was the first one I saw to use baritone 6 strings and also pitch shifters. And I just thought that was mind blowing. You know, this dude was going down like double D, double C, and didn't sound muddy at all. He used bass. Like I'm a bassist first and foremost. And so I always like my bass to be heavy in a mix. And there's always the me. I'm like, oh, you got an 8-string. I guess the bassist is out of a job. Haha. And I always thought that was bullshit. I always thought heavy mixes should have just as much bass as guitar. And he really showed me that you can tune low, still have the full spectrum of the instruments. And also, he is an engineer, but he doesn't try to do it full time. He takes the bands he wants to record and he adds his own style to them.
Right.
And I really like his philosophy. You know, like Humanity's Last Breath, they do play shows occasionally. They're not touring all the time. They pick up shows they want to play, but they mostly focus on their craft. And I saw that I was okay. You know, you always get drilled into your head. If you're going to be in a metal band, you got to work the road. You got to tour. If you want to make it, you got to do it. You know, you got to go out there, and which I'm not expecting Bestial to like blow up or anything. I'd be happy if we had a little cult following of like 500 listeners that just eat our stuff up. But
Right.
Buster was probably the first one to show me this new way of being a musician.
Yeah.
And that was really inspiring. Second one, probably be Frederick from Meshuggah, only because Meshuggah was like my first foray into like really progressive stuff, and another band that introduced me to like the lower tunings and whatnot. And they just inspired me because of how abrasive and just weird their music can be. They don't write commercialized stuff at all. Like when I first heard Meshuggah in high school, I thought it was bullshit. I was like, they're playing the same note for like 4 minutes. What is it? And
What is
I
this
didn't
shit?
yeah. And then 5 years later, I'm slowly getting into more progressive stuff. I learned what djent was and all that stuff. And I re-listened to Meshuggah and it just like clicked into place, and I think Meshuggah is very divided in the metal world. People either love them or they hate them. And because of that, they just have such a unique style and people either get it or they don't. And I understand when I mention Meshuggah and like, I could never get into them. I mean, they're boring, blah, blah, blah. And it hurts my soul, but at the same time, I get it. But anyway, I really like Frederick's style because he wrote most of the earlier Meshuggah stuff. And the way he went about it, they had always kind of been separate because they all live in Sweden, but they all had their own studios. And Thomas, their drummer, would write patterns. Frederick would write to that. And I don't know, just his chaotic way, but also jazzy way of putting songs together. And he's not a shreddy guy at all. I'm not big on guitar solos or sweeps. Like I said, bass player first, so a lot of my stuff's very rhythm based, and so is he. He does do solos and stuff, but he's definitely. I've always been more impressed by solid rhythm than dudes who can sweep all day. I mean, I respect. I'm all about solid rhythm and foundation. That's what really gets me, and Frederick really sticks out there. Third would probably be Nolly, producer, and also was the bassist for Periphery. Same with his like production value. The first time I heard like Periphery 2, I was like, whoa, how does this sound so like heavy but also clear? And you can hear the bass, you can hear everything. And Nolly in general is just a really good dude. He has a lot of like production classes that really opened my eyes to how to mix, how to like, if it wasn't for him, I'd be flying blind when it comes to like production and mixing and all that. You go on YouTube and there's so many dudes who have like how to mix blah, 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 how to make heavy metal guitars. And he was just able to break it down in a way where I could get it, and I probably add him to the list just because he really helps push me forward as an engineer as well as a producer. Yeah. So fourth one, drawing a blank here.
Pressure's on.
Probably Mark Okobo from Veil Maya. He was again one of those very first early progressive bands, which they don't even tune that low. They're like in drop B, or they were in drop B. I don't really listen to the newer Veil Maya, but him from Veil Maya, I got to meet him a couple times when they played up in St. Louis, which is kind of where we're by. And again, very distinct style. I hate to call them djent, but they definitely pioneered that genre.
Yeah, they really did.
Just those weird numerical breakdowns he did where you don't know where the restart is and where the one is. I thought that was so captivating. And he had these really weird leads. They weren't actually like solos. They were just weird little squiggly leads that had these weird effects. And they just sound like snakes crawling through your speakers. I thought that was just mind-blowing shit. And ever since I heard Common Man's Collapse, which is probably one of my favorite albums by them, I was just hooked immediately. I was like, I want to write stuff like that. I want to write stuff where you can't, you hear a pattern and it takes you weeks of listening to it to like figure it out,
Right.
And yeah, he'd probably be number 4. Number 5, I would have to say, and this is totally out of left field because this is not at all like the other bands I mentioned, but
that's fine.
And he's a drummer, actually. It would be Dave Turnkrantz, and he is from the band Russian Circles. They're like a post-metal, post-rock band. They're not technical at all, but post-rock in general is very atmospheric, very, I guess, repetitive and driven. But the first time I heard Russian Circles, they are almost progressive in the way they go about it. And Dave Turbenkrantz, their drummer, you know, he's not doing any crazy double bass. He's not blast beating, but like his grooves were so deep and so infectious that you just, I don't know. They were progressive and that they were doing things I'd never heard of before without being super technical, without being shreddy. And I try to approach that with my own writing. Like Bestial isn't really a progressive band. We're definitely chuggy groove based. But
Yeah.
occasionally I throw little things in there that pay homage to stuff like that. Little off time things, little weird time signature things just for a minute before we go back to straight caveman chugging type stuff.
It works, bro. It really works. And from the songs that I've heard so far, like, good grief. It's just I could definitely compare it to like Hive, if you've ever heard of them from Chicago. I could compare it to Hive. Let's see, there's Digora, I think. Like the last time I listened to them, I'm like, yeah, they kind of got a chaotic, genty, like groove thing going on. And I think it really works. So much appreciated, Mr. Shadrick, for sharing your story, telling us a little bit about your background for the first time publicly. Like, that's really cool. It's awesome to have these types of opportunities. And we will actually be right back for Zoom limits videos to 40 minutes. As I stop just my video. We'll be right back, guys. And welcome back, as we unfortunately have 40 minute forced pause thingies, but we are back. And now that Shadrick has told his story, told us about his background, and provided us a little insight on what he's into musically, now we enact frontman syndrome. Just kidding. We talk to the vocalist of Bestial, and we tell his story. We learn everything there is about him to know, everything he feels relevant to him as a vocalist and a musical enthusiast. You may take it away, sir.
All right. So I guess my start into this kind of music was when In the End came out by Linkin Park. That was like the greatest song I'd ever heard in my life. And at that point, it kind of like sent me off into listening to heavier and heavier music. And it went from Linkin Park to Drowning Pool to Mudvayne to Slipknot. And then it kind of just stayed there for a little bit, kind of like in the Breaking Benjamin, 3 Days Grace type of space. And then once I heard Killswitch Engage, that's really when it started coming into like the metalcore, like actual like metal with screaming vocals and all that. And I always wanted to be like in a band. I always wanted to be a singer, but I can't sing for shit. So I decided to maybe I could try and start screaming. And once once Killswitch Engage came around and like As I Lay Dying and Parkway Drive, I really started like trying to scream, and it was really shitty at first. And I just kept going at it. And honestly, I didn't even get my first like band. I wasn't even in my first band till I was 25. So like I'd been doing like just at home stuff since I was like 18, just like practicing and stuff like that. But it took me a while to get into an actual like band. So I was like kind of one of the older guys in the band, but yeah. So I was in a band for a little while called A New Breed. We were pretty basic metalcore type stuff.
Right.
Nothing too crazy. I think we were a little bit more abrasive than some of the stuff that was around here at the time. So we didn't really fit in with a lot of people. And so it kind of just, it didn't, I don't know. We had a little bit of a following, but it wasn't anything crazy. But yeah, so once that ended with some like, typical interpersonal drama between the members of the band. I was kind of bummed out because I found something I really like to do, which was write music. Like writing music and creating music is probably my favorite thing I've ever done. Like it's my favorite part of the whole band process. Like like he said, I do like doing the live stuff. There's something just about having a crowd in the palm of your hand that's really fun, but it's all the other shit that goes along with it that is really not fun. But honestly, like writing and recording and all that stuff, that's where I'm at. That's what I like doing. And so I was kind of bummed out when the New Breed broke up, and I started doing like some side projects with some other people. It just didn't really pan out, but it did open the door to The Void Within when I got a message from their guitarist, and he was like, "Hey, we're starting a metalcore groove metal band. You want to do vocals?" And I was like, "Sure, let's do it." And then they brought Shad in to do bass. Like, I mean, honestly, I think a week or two after I agreed to be a part of it. And then from there is just once he started writing some songs and stuff, and it's like, oh wow, I like the way this guy writes. So he wrote a couple songs for The Void, and like I really dug that. So when he asked me to do this kind of like side project, that's we're a little bit more extreme in what we do than what The Void does. So I was really kind of excited to work that angle instead of, I mean, don't get me wrong, The Void we bring the fucking heavies, but like this is just a little darker, it's tuned lower for one. Yeah, it's just different. So I was excited to jump onto that and kind of like show my range and show what I can do. And then, yeah, I guess that's all there is about like, my musical like journey to get here. But as far as like, who are my like influences these days, right off the bat, the first one right now is the vocalist from Paleface. I don't know if you've ever listened to. Yeah. Oh man, his like rhythm patterns and his ferocity is just unmatched. It's like that's the kind of anger I wish I could get across. Is the anger from that dude. He's a fucking beast, man.
Quick fun fact too, I'm actually buddies with the dude who did the intro for the new album. His name is Josh Martineau.
Mm-hmm. Oh, nice.
Yeah.
Fuck
so
yeah.
like I'm not that deep in with Paleface as I would hope to be, but at the very least, I know the guy personally behind that intro and how authentic that intro was for Fear and Dagger. And absolutely, dude, Paleface is almost unmatched in the scene right now as far as consistent ferocity. And it's got that same raw dog energy as Orphan, as Body Snatcher, Traitors, fucking No Face, No Case, also homies of ours now. We've had them on the podcast. There's Silent Generation. There's fucking Bound in Fear. Like plenty of these bands, bro, in the scene. I'm aiming to get all of them on the podcast if I haven't already. But yeah, to break it down a little bit, love Paleface. Absolutely. And Zelly is such a nice dude.
Yeah. Fuck yeah. That's true. And then as far as like influences in the past, there was so I don't know if you ever heard of the band Arsonist Gets All the Girls, but
No.
they were like this, like, I don't know how to describe it, like deathcore mixed with like, they almost do like jazzy like breaks in their songs where they do jazz numbers and like really weird, like obviously their name is Arsonist Gets All the Girls. Like they had really odd like names to their songs and stuff. But anyway,
kind of remind me of I Wrestle the Bear once.
Yeah, kind of like I Wrestle the Bear.
Yeah, or like I Set My Friends on Fire or some shit like that. Except with more jazzy elements as you mentioned in it.
Yeah, and like they had this vocalist for like their two middle albums, and his tone and his fucking, I can't think of his name right now, but God, he was just like, he was a monster. He was on Portals, and they had an album called Motherland too. And I fucking love those albums, and he influenced me a lot. And just like he never repeated himself, and it's like I try not to repeat myself. It's hard not to sometimes because it's just like you kind of run out of things to say about a particular topic at some point. But like that's one of the things is that I try to do is not repeat myself unless there's a chorus in the song, but like repeating myself, like repeating the same phrases and stuff throughout the song. So that's one thing that he's one like really big influence. And then honestly, the best though is probably Randy Blythe from Lamb of God. Yeah, that dude, he's just man, he's just something else. And his like on stage demeanor is kind of like what I would like to, I don't know,
Encompass
like,
or
yeah,
embody. Yeah.
yes, exactly. That's his like energy on stage is just fantastic. So he's won. What is that? Is that 3 now?
Yes.
Man, just so many good ones. Oh, honestly, the first like heavy band that I listened to that did not have singing choruses in it, like, so I was listening to Kill Switch and As I Lay Dying, but that was only because they had singing in the choruses. And I wasn't really clicking with the screaming all that much, but the first band that really got me into that was Bury Your Dead. So their vocalist, Matt Russo, he's a huge influence. He's fucking awesome. I love that band so much.
Got one more.
Got one more.
And this could easily be like your favorite album of all time, your favorite song of all time, a band that like never misses with their albums. So like, let's provide a little bit more pressure and see if we can hone in on one of those characters.
Okay. So like, all right, let's see here. Man.
Our goal here is to ambush, but in the most positive and not toxic way.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I can't think off the top of my head.
Because there are hundreds, bro.
Honestly, like the old Parkway Drive stuff was probably like Killing with a Smile. That album, the production on it isn't that great, but the music and just the like, I don't know, the screams, the way he could do the highs and the lows, and the melody and the breakdowns. It's just like that Killing with a Smile album is probably from front to back my favorite like metalcore album that kind of sent me into where it's more about like the music rather than the singing and the melody. Does that make sense? Like it's more about the heaviness of it and not the poppy like singing that I used to be into.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the intensity. Yeah.
Right. No, I gotcha. So, I mean, yeah, in that case, we kind of sped run through the vocalist. Your name is Tyler, right?
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
Cool. I was like, there's so many bands, so many names. I'm like, I hope it's not like Chad or something. He's like, you weren't fucking listening, bro. So Tyler told us his story. He told us his background. So now, I mean, that's a pretty good segue into what will be an ad break. And we are back. This is going to be, I don't even know what fucking number this episode is. That's kind of been a pattern recently with the other 3 episodes still in storage and another episode coming this Saturday afternoon with James Joker Williams of Shrine, Possession with Intent, formerly of So This Is Suffering, and so many other fucking projects. I'm excited for that conversation. It's going to be a massive one. I think it's really going to evolve the podcast, but you'll understand why once the episode releases. But it's currently May 10th. We're not on Saturday yet, okay? So let's not talk too much about Saturday. We have us here, Bestial. They released a new EP, a self-titled EP. So now, really, we address Shadrick and Tyler as collectively Bestial, right? We address them as the band, the project that they are, acting as if the band is one being. So this should be really fun. It's always my favorite thing to do in the podcast is to just address, because that's what the Anatomy podcast is. It's to dissect, of course, the music business and try to find out as many dirty secrets as possible. That way, young and upcoming musicians and band projects do not get fucked over by the major music scene, the massive record labels and stuff, you know, the merch cut incidences and shit. Like, we're trying to prevent that as much as possible, whilst also providing musicians time to tell their story and really provide insight to their audience, to their possible future listeners. Even a month from now, I see you. Hi. Hi, person a month from now, or even a year from now. This is for you. You know what I mean? This is for you to learn more about the musicians that you're supporting. That way there's a more authentic connection when you decide to buy a shirt or a CD or a wall flag. That's also what we're here for. So let's calm down a little bit on my end. Passion, huh? So first question, of course, this is a question that folks would want to ask in person, maybe, but until further notice, Bestial is a studio project. So how did you boys figure out the name for the project? Is there any background behind it? Was it a spur of the moment decision? Tell us a little bit about the band's name.
So I was the one who initially came up with it because I wanted something very short, very sweet. I'm a very big fan of just one word names, you know, not to throw shade on any bands, but when the band names like a whole sentence, it kind of, I don't know. I like short band names, and I already knew from the outset that this was going to be a project that was just straight aggression, straight pissed off, you know, relentless from front to back. And I was trying to think of words that encompass that. And Bestial, you know, is very much very animalistic, very when you think of like a tiger eating a fucking gazelle's guts out, you know, that's bestial. It's animalistic, it's primal. And I thought that really encompassed what this project was all about, you know.
Absolutely.
Tyler?
Tyler?
When he brought it to me, I was like, yeah, I think that's the one.
Yeah. And I have to admit, I was confused when I first saw the name because I'm like, okay, so you got a pretty interesting old English font iteration for the logo, right? And you got your special B, which is good for branding. Any band that can just utilize a B, whether lowercase or capital, Brand of Sacrifice, Body Snatcher, Between the Buried and Me. You know, there are so many different bands that utilize just a single letter, and they like, you know, they disfigure the letter, and that's just boom, branding. Bestial, I have to admit, I was like, why isn't there an A though? Like, because I have a feeling that's what the band's name is for, is to invoke a bestial mindset, right? Capability, the intensity of it. It's primitive. It's without empathy, right? It is thoughtless. It is just based off of instinct, right? And that is definitely what I get through the music, is something that is just relentless. It has no mercy, but because that is simply in its DNA, that is in its code, which musically speaking, the ferocity, the intensity ends up being in the DNA and code of this band. And that's just with the 2 songs that I've listened to so far. I have yet, absolutely transparent here, you know, putting me out in the firing line. I have yet to listen to the entirety of the self-titled EP, but most likely that is exactly what I shall be doing once we conclude this session sometime later today, relevantly soon, okay? Because the EP's been out for a little bit. So obviously, when it comes to the identity of a band, getting started, getting set up, sometimes bands, they will start out with a self-titled. Sometimes bands like Suicide Silence, they wait until what, they're like 4th or 5th record to do a self-titled album. And then, you know, the identity that they fulfill and they put forward to the people saying, this is what we want to do. Then unfortunately, because of, you know, industry standards, the reception, they kind of backtrack on the identity musically of that record. And that's specifically to Suicide Silence. No shade on them, but that's always confused me, right? So when it came to deciding whether this was going to be a self-titled or not, was it simply because of identity, or was it simply because you wanted to start out the discography of this project by announcing yourselves?
I don't know. I can't really remember how we came to the decision to do the self-titled. I noticed that was a thing a lot of bands do, is like they'll put out like a self-titled EP, then they spring from there. And it was like a good humble decision, you know, that this is who we are. This is us. And so, yeah.
Yeah, I'd say that, yeah, it was kind of just kind of simple, to keep it simple, really. We don't want to like bog down like in the minutia of all that stuff. Like obviously when we do like we're currently kind of like working on some new stuff, and I feel like the next album's definitely we're gonna have to think about the name for it and all that stuff. But like, yeah, it was just kind of to keep it simple, keep it based on the music, and not have to worry about it. Because being in a 6-person band, we're constantly going back and forth about what name for a song or what name for the album and all that shit. So it was kind of nice to just the 2 of us just kind of be like, you know what, fuck it, it's just gonna be Bestial, you know, just something like that.
Yeah, no, I like that. That's cool. And as long as you are confident in your decision, you understand what's going on, and you're comfortable with that, you're content, you feel that it's right. That's really all that matters. Anybody who has an issue with that can buzz off like the flies that they are.
Right.
Just kidding. But I think another question I would have to ask for the people is when it comes to writing any song for Bestial, Shadrick, you mentioned earlier that when it comes to the name, right, it defines and kind of isolates down to a musical identity of ferocity, primitive nature, right? You're breaking it down to the animalistic descendancy of, all things musically speaking that this could allude to or tribute to, right? So, what is the most important thing about writing a song for Bestial? And both of you can answer these separately, being bada boom.
Well, for me at least, it's all about the anger and the energy, which I try and transfer to the riffs. Uh, there's no, besides power chords, there's no major chords. It's all disgusting, gross, super minor stuff. And I try and give Tyler the most aggressive track possible so that when he listens to it, it amps him up, and then that brings out his bestial side. And yeah.
Yeah. I mean, as far as the lyrics go, it's just, I wouldn't say most of it is personal at all. It's mostly, I mean, I guess in the fact that it is stuff that pisses me off, because a lot of the stuff that I write about is stuff that makes me mad. It's like, you don't want to be negative all the time, but at the same time, you need an outlet to get that stuff out. So it's like, that's my way of, it's my therapy to write this stuff in these songs. It's like, sometimes it might be a little bit more angry than I actually am about something, but it's just, it's, you gotta, write a fucking good song, and it's like,
Yeah.
I don't really mean all the lyrics that I say, but like, for sure, like, I'd say quite a bit of it is actually stuff that I either believe or like, I I didn't just write it just because it sounds cool, basically. So
Yeah. As long as it's not like, this is heavy and like that's the end of the sentence, there's a little bit more substance to that. And I mean, dude, hell, bands like Attila, Rob Zombie, Bro Job, formerly, they all based their discography off of course, somewhat off, like there's some depth of authenticity to what they write lyrically. They are expressing what's going on at the time, but for the most part, okay, Rob Zombie, that's one of the biggest examples I can think of, who's just like absolutely filthy rich off of like music, movies, and other shit. So I mean, at least it's not just music. But I mean, dude, the guy writes about like fucking corpses or killing vampires, or the combination of the two, and that's most of his discography. He has fun. He alludes to like darker themes that also coincide with his films. But I mean, that's more like just simply creative process. Like, okay, how ridiculous can I make this song sound lyrically speaking? And teenage Nosferatu puss, like, okay, so teenage vampire genitals, like what the fuck are we talking about here, bro? But that's just Rob Zombie in a nutshell. For the most part, it's like when you're making music and when you're trying to invoke that ferocity, there has to be some type of authenticity and substance and depth to what's going on. So I mean, that's a pretty good question, and that's a pretty good answer to that question. And it almost makes you think, like, even if you're not feeling it in the moment, like, I wonder if half the bands in the scene kind of channel their intrusive thoughts as well into certain songs. Like, that's kind of the first question that comes to my brain. It's like, wait, is this like, is Spite, for example, Spite, that's a really good example. Because Darius has even said before that when it comes to writing music for Spite, if it wasn't for that, he'd probably be in a psych ward. And this is something he said on a live stream near the end of the Root of All Evil cycle. So I'm not sure how familiar you boys are with Spite, but yeah, like it's creative processes like that really allow the more darker, primitive sides of us, the more bestial sides of us, to kind of channel through and make this music, make it as ferocious as possible. That way, when you hear it and you hear the person behind it, you're like, that was you. Like, it's really the element of shock, right? Shock value. So concerning this specific EP, would you gentlemen mind if we go track by track and even give like a surface level idea of what's going on lyrically and what was just going on creatively speaking for these songs?
Yeah.
Awesome. So let's go ahead then and go under the skin or something of Bestial, the self-titled EP, which is now available on all streaming platforms. And I myself am going to go ahead and pull it up on my Spotify. That way I can just keep track of, or keep record of the track listing, keep track of the track listing. Oh boy, oh boy. So we dive into this EP, and again, I have yet to listen to the entirety of this EP, but I have every intention to. And boys, on another note, I did not know every song on this record or album or EP started with a C. That's very interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, the first three songs all started with a C organically. So I was like, you know what? Fuck it. I'm just gonna try and find a C word for each song and just keep it that way.
That's funny. That's funny. So
Yeah.
as we dive into it then, track 1, we have Creation. What is going on here lyrically and what is going on here musically speaking? What was the thought process behind this track?
All right. So lyrically, it's like it's definitely like I wouldn't say anti-religious song, but it's basically that's what it's like. It's not so much it's not, I don't know how to describe it. It's basically a way of like saying that, oh man, it's always hard for me to like actually describe what I was thinking when I was writing it, but there's like lines in it like a sacrifice with eternal debt to pay. It's basically meaning like, yeah, you got Jesus was sacrificed for us, but now we're living in eternal debt to him, basically. So like even after, we'll have to pay a debt to him regardless. So it's kind of like that's kind of what I was seeing about. It's kind of like how that's not necessarily cool with me, you know, basically. Yeah. And then
right, sorry. Yeah. I wasn't meaning to interrupt you.
No, you're fine. I didn't really have much more to say. It's just, yeah, it's mostly coming from that angle of like hypocrisy from religious people and like, you know, how they think they look down on people like me, but in reality, it's just, we're all the same, basically.
Yeah. And I mean, that's very important, a mindset to acknowledge, because like when you first said like your first commentary, it's like, we're just in eternal debt to him because he made the sacrifice thousands of years ago. I get very like petty, anti-religious, like Karen vibes from this. Just like, really? You expect us to do all this shit when he died on a cross thousands of years ago? I want to speak to your manager. I am the manager. I am God. You're like, fuck you, or whatever. It's definitely a mindset that I can get into as well. It's an ideology I can share because I don't even know, bro. Like Western monotheism, which is what I generalize it to, whether Christianity, Mormonism, Catholicism, just everything, bro, that has anything to do with the one omnipotent, omniscient God. Like there's a reason that I'm all about ignite the church and separation of church and state, or the return in today's age, apparently, to separation of church and state. It's the reason I'm not Republican politically speaking. It's the reason I'm not anything politically speaking, right? Because unfortunately, our country is still tied down religiously to Western monotheism, right? And it's just so fucking toxic sometimes, and it's so annoying because you think of all these individuals that are so just certain, and I mean, like, good for them, they're confident in their path, but also when you realize how brainwashed and sheepish some of these people can sound sometimes, just like, oh, it's all in the will of God, or, you know, even kids dying of cancer more than anything else in the modern age, and just like Christians or priests or whatever will mark it up to, it was the will of God. The child was being tested. And of Sulfur, their song Earthen asked, why would God test a child? Why does God need to test a child? And it really begs the question of how many criminal, evil acts in the world need to be just like, oh, it was the will of God. It was meant to be. All these
Yeah.
people were meant to be raped, murdered, and killed for no fucking reason. It was the will of God. I'm like, how? What?
Yeah.
Like, how deep fried freaking ramen straight out of the package noodle is your brain, bro? Like, that's not how the world should be. We shouldn't be so willing to accept these types of things. So I definitely, not to get into that type of rant, but that stuff's important. Acknowledging how much religion and stuff like that can brainwash people, can influence people to just accept atrocities in the world. Shout out to Nithful, shout out to Of Sofer and all these other bands in the scene who are making that message very apparent. Like, why do we need to accept all these terrible things and attest it to the will of God? Like, that's ridiculous.
Yeah.
Cut out the cancer, you know what I mean? So, track 2, Crusades. What is going on here lyrically?
That one's even more of like a scalpel to exactly what you were saying about separation of church and state. It was after the abortion thing with the
outlawed abortion,
when they outlawed they outlawed Roe v. Wade, basically.
Yeah.
So
Right.
It's like basically people pushing their beliefs on other people and believing that it's their godly duty to do so, but in reality, it's just like this. It's America, like it was built on the separation of church and state. And I don't care what you believe, but you don't get to push your shit onto me.
Exactly, bro.
Me and make me believe the same way and make me live in a world where, you get your way. Because if a lot of these people got their way, I think this country would be unrecognizable if a lot of people that believe that way got this way. And it just so happened that our release date happened to be a year after for this song, a year after the January 6th riots at the Capitol, because we were using that riot footage in our video as like background footage. And it just happened to come out on the 1 year or 2 year anniversary of that shit. And I just was like, holy fuck.
which, for context, me and Tyler live in Missouri, specifically Southeast Missouri. And so we see a lot of the really, not to say that you have to think the way we do, obviously
Right.
we're more left leaning, but we see a lot of the really extreme side of that.
Yeah.
And I think that's where part of, at least for him, his lyrical side, we're bombarded with that shit constantly. So
Yeah.
it was kind of like a pushback
Yeah.
to that.
Definitely a fuck you to people that think that they can talk to me in a certain way just because they are believers.
Yeah,
Right.
seriously. And it's really one of the more toxic mechanics and one of the most unproductive mechanics of society today is that slowly, bit by bit, it seems that the First Amendment is being dismantled. And like, politically speaking, I will say this on the podcast for the first time. I am anti-fucking Mason. Okay. So what that means is that's a party that predates most of the political parties today. And that is a party that exclusively opposed the Freemason Party, which was originally the Democratic Party at the very beginning. So the Democratic and Republican Party, they've switched over time.
Your audio dropped out.
Aha.
There you are.
There you go.
Okay. I don't know where I cut off, but it I don't know, it predates most of those political parties, right? And literally, you look up the Freemason political party, the Democratic Freemasons or whatever. Most of the founding fathers are in that political party. And it predates everything, bro. But their main goal was to manipulate the press, manipulate any news. And that's what they're doing today. But, not to sound conspiracy or Joe Rogan as fuck, but it's kind of true, unfortunately. And it's happening everywhere. So
Yeah.
it's political atmosphere, right? And religious atmosphere, that obligation, that constriction, that suffocation to, oh, you need to be an evangelical Christian or Mormon or a Catholic or whatever in the United States. And that's why you would understand why they wanted Roe v. Wade overturned. I'm like, absolutely not, dude. Keep your religion out of the actual state laws. It has no place in state law, dude. You have no idea how many of these families literally either get raped into having a kid, or they're forced in, like, more or less not raped, but forced into it. Those are other circumstances. Or they're even like obligated religiously. They're like, you can't kill that baby. You'd be killing a baby. You'd be killing a human being. It's like, but also, would you rather me be in financial debt because of religious viewpoint, or would you rather me take care of things early on and then have kids when I'm more financially ready? You know what I mean? It's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous.
Well,
So
there's a line in the song that I say, in the end, they will come for you too, which is basically like, when they're done with me and the people that are totally against you, they'll come after the people that are the moderates of the Christian side too. They'll come for you next because you're not as Christian as them. You're not as them. So that's kind of part of what I was getting at.
Badass, dude. And it's always good to provide that type of what is it? Provide that type of attention to that topic. Bring awareness. There we go. Bring awareness to those unfortunate ideologies and stuff, just the toxicity that is Western monotheism here in the United States. Like, shout out to the Satanic Temple for fighting first in Texas against the state court or whatever it is to return us to where, women have the right to abort if they wish to. That's absolutely what should be done. Track 3 would be Crawl.
So Crawl lyrically is just basically like anything that I have real like guilty conscience a lot, where it doesn't matter what I do, I could just say a joke and I feel like the whole world's gonna end and I'm gonna be, like buried alive basically underneath like a weight of guilt. That's what it feels like. And that's kind of what the song's about. It's about basically benign stuff that I've done always plaguing me and like making me think that like one day I'm gonna have to suffer one day, because like I don't really believe in karma, but it's just kind of like this thing that's like all this stupid stuff that I've done over the years. It's like not even really that bad, but it'll all pile up and it'll bury me alive and stuff. So
I know, force you to be like on your knees and break you down to a crawling point. I completely get that, dude. Because when it comes to situations like that, and I mean, I'm kind of the same way. So when it comes to just trying to be the best person you can be, any flaw, any failure, any mistake, any obstacle that you face in life, and you feel that you might have approached that the wrong way, or people later in life say, oh, you should have done it this way or that way. Every now and then I have that issue too. I have that absence of individuality and absence of self. And I kind of lose track that I don't want to live my life with regrets, and I'm not a shitty person. I haven't done nearly as bad or silly, right, or irresponsible as most of my other friends, just because I simply did not want that on my conscience later in life. So of course, the thing is, though, as my own band name would suggest, we are all blind without our failures, which it's just blind without our failures, but we are all blind without our failures. Absolutely. Without our failures, without our flaws, without our insecurities, without our, for example, maybe you're paraplegic or something, without those things in your life, you would be blind to the current timeline, the current lifetime that you are living, the current reality that you reside in. So definitely bringing awareness to that is important, because you can't look back and just keep regretting everything. Like, we all live in the past, sure, because every moment right now, even 1 second, that's the past. Like, boom, we all live in the past, or what we will understand later in life when we truly settle as the past. But it's important to realize that nobody is perfect. Some people are a lot shittier than others because they're like, oh, I have a mental condition that entices me to touch children or murder people for no fucking reason. Those people, their purpose is to remind us who not to be. And that's kind of always been my philosophy. Everybody has their purpose. Everybody has their flaws, but we would absolutely be blind without the failures and the losses that we have obtained and conquered throughout life, because you had to conquer them. So that's really good. Track 4, we have Circles, which was my first song with this band.
Nice. I guess that one starts, he wrote this just fucking ripper of a riff what were you thinking when you were wanting it to be like a thrashier style than some of the other stuff that we've done?
Yeah, very, very fast, very relentless. There's triplets all the way through. It's just constant galloping and not shredding, but constant, relentless from front to back.
Yeah. And my idea, when I first heard it, I thought of like being dragged down to hell, kind of. So that's like what circles is,
Like the
means like
7 circles.
yeah, like that. So it's basically like you're not a lot of the words in it. It's like dragged down to the depths. You're just the same as me. It's basically like you're no fucking better than me. You know, that's you can put yourself on a pedestal, but you're coming to hell just with me, just like me. You know, basically like that. Yeah,
I definitely remember those lyrics because they definitely like those are definitely repeating lines in the song. So it's like this is really what the song is about. Pay attention, bro. It works. Track 5, we have Consume. Like
so Consume's kind of like, I feel like one of the weirder songs on the album, just because it kind of starts and stops, but it's like there's like the theme of it is kind of like watching someone be taken away by like the sirens, like in the like mythology sirens. That's kind of like the mythical text of it, but like the actual like literal stuff that I was talking about is like basically just watching someone get taken from like whether it be like, you know, drug addiction or like, you know, you could have saved them by doing this, doing that, and about basically how
self-destruction,
yeah, and how you just watch someone self-destruct and how you feel kind of guilty about it and stuff like that.
Right. So like literally any addiction, any bad habit, watching it consume them, and there's like nothing you can do about it.
Yep.
Makes sense. Okay.
Yep.
All right, so continuing with the freaking Under the Skin session, talking about the Bestial self-titled EP, we continue with track 5, Circles, I think.
Yeah, so it was basically just talking about how the lyrical theme is like getting dragged down to hell, and nobody's better than me, so if I'm going to hell, you're going to hell with me, basically.
Right. I completely lost track of that too. We completely like we already did Circles and Consume, so now we kind of provide some closure by talking about the track closure on this Bestial EP. So what's going on here? Obviously it's the ending track for the EP, but what else? You know what I mean?
Yeah, so it's about death in general, about losing someone to dying in general. There are some specific things that I'm drawing from, but it's not necessarily, a lot of it has to do with like a lot of the themes is more like suicide related, but it can be used, and I used it as kind of like some of the lines were like specific to what I was going through that wasn't suicide related, but could in the end be a cohesive song to where it could be about that. It could be about someone dying, you know, just naturally, you know, it's about the anger of losing someone and like the fact that you'll never get to see what they will become and stuff like that, basically.
Right. And therefore closure, it kind of provides closure in open interpretation. It's one of those songs. Yeah. It's written around something that happened to you or maybe to a loved one, maybe to a friend, but you also then think of maybe how worse it could be. You know what I mean? How certain people pass away that kind of conquers and it adds even more layers of intensity, grief, mourning, depression, and the stages of loss, right? The 7, I think like 6 or 7 stages of loss, maybe like 5. I forgot. It's been such a long time, but it's like it happens to everybody. But this song is meant to then be a departing gift for now from Bestial, saying it's difficult. We all go through loss, and it can happen to anybody at any given point. It happens in different ways, and there are stages to the loss. So I mean, there you go. That's a great way to wrap up, I think, what is going to be a great first EP, a great first album from this tiny 2-person studio project that has honestly, again, been compared to here on the podcast to Hive. to Digora, and plenty of other just borderline genty, but also very dark and just bassy, groovy metalcore, deathcore, whatever you wish to call it, people. But this has been the Anatomy Podcast, and that will conclude the Under the Skin session later. And to wrap up this Anatomy Podcast episode with Shadrick and Tyler of Bestial, do you boys have anything that you would want to talk about regarding the near future? Because you mentioned you're already on the grind for new material. What else do you wish to provide your audience, your listeners, regarding the next even half year or something similar?
Well, we definitely already have an album planned. We have like 7 songs that are like either finished, halfway finished, in progress. We're planning on dropping a couple singles soon. One's an original and one's a cover of Vulture by, what's the band name?
A Life Once Lost. They're an older like metalcore, like early groovecore metalcore type, almost like southern metal in a way. And we're kind of gonna do our bestial sound to it. And yeah, I'm fucked. I listened to that song a long time ago, and I'm so excited to put my vocals down on that. But yeah, planning on doing like, what was it, like 12 songs, I think. Maybe that included would be 13. We'd have to see what because we don't want to, you don't want to put every song that you write on the album because it may not be ready. So it's just whatever ends up being. But I'd like to do at least 11 new original songs.
Yep. So we got a full album coming for sure. Got a couple singles we're going to be parceling out to people, and we got that cover, which is like paying homage to our roots, and adding our own flair to it. So as all local bands would say, we have big things coming.
Yeah,
always
big coming.
Yes.
Always. And you got to stay on the grind perpetually, or people just like they lose interest. They kind of think you're a ghost or whatever. So it's good to know that you guys have already have at least chapter 2 of a roadmap figured out. And I hope to get you guys back on the Anatomy Podcast, even for just an Under the Skin session regarding this full length record. But until then, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for stopping by. Thank you for your time. Thank you for offering this band your time as well. For anybody who's here, most likely you've listened to the EP/album by now. You've provided your support, your feedback. You've provided everything that you need to do at this moment to make sure that this band continues growing. So thank you for that. I'm sure the boys would say the exact same thing. And this has been the Anatomy Podcast. And like we say over on the Sean Cross channel, just like the great Eternal Music Machine, let's keep cranking.
Hell yeah.
Hell yeah.